She's an activist for voting rights and justice. She's the director of youth engagement at the Drum Major Institute. And on Tuesday, she will follow in her grandfather's footsteps by speaking at the National Cathedral. Yolanda?
Thank you to all of those who are here to honor my grandfather's 93rd year, the only way we know how, through action. I am the proud granddaughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. I am also the proud daughter of Martin Luther King III and Arndrea Waters King. Although I never got to meet my grandfather, his lessons and drive passed down to me at the dinner table, told to me at bedtime, and shared during long road trips. But most importantly, his lessons are passed down to me and young people across the country during moments in history like this one that call for all of us to work together and take action to correct injustice and advance equality. One important lesson I learned from my grandparents is that no matter how old you are, no matter who you are, all of us can create change when we choose to show up and speak out. I'm speaking especially to the young people here today in Washington who have decided to show up on a Monday morning to speak out and demand their senators protect their future right to vote. Today in 2022, the right to vote is under attack as our elected leaders try to silence our voices. At just 13, I have fewer voting rights than I did the day that I was born. That's why my family has spent this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend mobilizing, first in Phoenix and now in Washington, to demand the President and Senate get voting rights legislation done. Our rights are on the line. And while I, like many of you, am not old enough to vote, this fight is personal for me. It's our future these elected leaders are deciding. It's our voices they are trying to silence because they know our voices are powerful. They may tell us hundreds of times that we're too young to understand, but those who try to undermine our power do so because they know young people will not stand down in the face of injustice. If you, like me, can't vote, just let me tell you about some other ways you can fight for the future right to vote. You can write a letter to Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin. You can call their offices and tell them that you want to see them choose your future over the filibuster, a broken rule that's been used to uphold slavery and segregation and block progress on civil rights. You can talk to your friends and parents about why this matters. You can keep showing up like you showed up today. Fighting for voting rights is about fighting for the right to participate in democracy, a movement my grandfather led many decades ago. But it's also about all the other issues that affect all of us: climate justice, reproductive justice, LGBTQIA+ justice, and so much more. We will not stop organizing to get this done. But for all the elected leaders out there who are tweeting, posting, and celebrating my grandfather, Dr. King, today, my message to you is simple. Do not celebrate, legislate. The Senate must do the right thing when this legislation comes to a vote tomorrow. Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin, our future hinges on your decision, and history will remember what choice you make. So join me in demanding action for today, tomorrow, and generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda, for that powerful speech. We're now going to hear from Arndrea Waters King, president of the Drum Major Institute. For decades, Mrs. King has been dedicated to serving humanity as a leader in the fight against inequality, injustice, and hate crimes. Today, she works to uphold the King legacy and encourage individuals to embrace their unique contribution to peace, justice, and equity for all. Alongside her husband, she is one of the co-leaders of the Deliver for Voting Rights campaign that gathered us here today. Mrs. King?
Good morning. We're thankful to so many who have made today possible, and I'd especially like to thank Speaker Pelosi for her fearless leadership in working to protect the rights of Black and Brown Americans. Thank you to Congressman Beatty of Ohio and Congresswoman Sewell of Alabama for fighting not just for their own constituents, but for all of us. Thank you to the hundreds of partners whose organizing has gotten us to this moment. And thank you to the Peace Walk organizers for putting together this morning's powerful march. America, we are at a fork in the road. We have two paths before us, one that leads to the nation the Constitution promises, and one that leads deeper into division and injustice. Since January 6, 2021, our country has bled from 1,000 daily cuts of racism, white supremacy, and disinformation. In that time, more than 400 pieces of legislation have been proposed, and 19 states have passed laws that restrict the right to vote. That is why we must eliminate the filibuster and pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act now. As Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1964, to maintain the filibuster is to harm the health of our nation. It was true then, and it's true today. The filibuster is not some time-honored tradition that must be preserved to protect democracy. And even if it were, what good is a filibuster when preserving it will destroy the democracy it's supposed to protect? Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin want a supermajority. Well, a supermajority of citizens support this legislation. They say eliminating the filibuster won't address our country's disease of division. Saying we have a disease of division but not restoring voting rights is like diagnosing a patient with treatable cancer and withholding the treatment. The filibuster is an instrument of division. As a mother who wants to leave a better world for the next generation, I feel the weight of the moment. Our daughter Yolanda is Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King's only grandchild. And I know that when he talked about his dream, he was also dreaming of her. She is just 13 years old. In 2013, when she was 5, the Voting Rights Act was gutted by a Supreme Court decision that said states with a history of racist voter suppression didn't need oversight anymore because racism was a thing of the past. In 2021, when she was 12, the Supreme Court toppled the rest of the Voting Rights Act, and her home state passed laws that make it even harder for Black and brown Georgians to vote. Today, Yolanda and her peers, children of just 13, have fewer voting rights than the day they were born. What would MLK say about that? Is that the dream that he held for his granddaughter? I asked Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and all those who stand in the way of restoring voting rights, is that the legacy that you want to leave behind? Many have chosen that path before you, and there are stains on our country's history. After the Civil War ended in 1865, do you know how long it took our country to come together and overcome our disease of division? to get it passed? 100 years. 100 years of filibustered civil rights laws. 100 years of Jim Crow. 100 years of poll taxes and impossible tests for black voters. 100 years of being so intimidated at polling places that many felt safer staying at home. If Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema maintain their position, they will extend white supremacy's short chokehold on our democracy and consign themselves to the same foolish legacy. Do they want us to wait another 100 years to have our rights restored? Is that the beloved community of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King? If so, tell it to the grandmother in West Virginia who waits hours to vote, only to find out she's been kicked off the voter polls and it's too late to do anything about it. Tell it to the elderly Native man on a reservation in Arizona who will have to travel 20 miles to vote, even though he doesn't have access to transportation. Tell it to the mother who will wait 10 hours to vote in Atlanta with her children by her side and her bag full of water and snacks because it's illegal to pass out food and water to voters. But we can't stop now because we've seen what President Biden and Senate Democrats can do when they commit. They delivered a historic bill that will improve our country's infrastructure, and that has me thinking about bridges. Bridges take you somewhere new and help you cross impassable terrain. This morning, as we walked in the rain and snow across the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge with our Peace Walk partners and the DC MLK Holiday Committee, and as I crossed, I thought about John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton. When John Lewis and those marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma in 1965, they were trying to lead us from the scorched earth of oppression to the solid footing of freedom. Today, our nation stands on another bridge, and another dangerous threat waits on the other side. But we must not allow it to turn us back. If, as we believe, we are our ancestors' answered prayers, we must ensure that our descendants become ours. We do that by linking arms and forging ahead across the bridge of democracy to claim the future for all Americans. I'm reminded of a poem by Langston Hughes, a poem that my father-in-law recited to the students of Barrett Junior High School in October 1967. The poem is called Mother to Son, and in it I can hear all of those who marched before us, all of the years of prayers of our ancestors fortifying us now. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I'm climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on those steps because you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I'm still going, honey. I'm still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. As in that poem, life for many black and brown Americans has been no crystal stair. And we will not allow our elected officials to add to the tacks and splinters while we climb. As my father-in-law, Dr. King, told those young people that day, you have a responsibility to seek to make your nation a better nation in which to live and to seek to make life better for everyone. He urged them to seek beauty and truth. If he were here today, he would look our leaders in the eye and challenge them with those same words. History hinges on the choices they will make. The tones of democracy ring louder than division. Freedom and justice for all. And no matter what it looks like, no matter how tired we may be, we will not give up. We will not give out. We will not give in. whether this bill is passed tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. And we already know what the end will be, because God always ends on all is well. And until all is well, it's not the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. King. Now we're going to hear from Martin Luther King III. As the oldest son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King III is a leader on the world stage, a peacemaker, a negotiator, and on some of today's most critical issues nationally and internationally, including voting rights. Most recently, Mr. King has taken over the leadership of the Drum Major Institute, with the focus on continuing the King legacy through campaigns like Give Us the Ballot. The work of the Drum Major Institute inspires and supports organizations and individuals to embrace their unique contribution to peace, justice, and equity for all. Alongside his wife, Mr. King is one of the co-leaders of the Deliver for Voting Rights campaign that gathered us here today. Mr. King?
Good afternoon. I too would like to thank so many who have embarked upon this journey with us today as we observe the King holiday. My father would have been on Saturday 93 years old. But first, let me thank Speaker Pelosi for her tireless commitment on behalf of Black and Brown Americans, as well as the Congressional Black Caucus Chair, Congresswoman Beatty, and also Congresswoman Terry Sewell from the state of Alabama, for constantly fighting for that which is right. And I want to thank every partner. Over 180 organizations have joined us, over 1,000 pastors. Every major labor union has joined in this quest for voting rights. But I want to thank every partner who made it today for the Peace Walk and all the organizers of the Peace Walk who understood the importance not just of the day, but of this moment. And thank you to all of you who are joining us here today, and especially you as members of the American media helping to get the word out to American people. My mother always said the holiday should be a day on, not a day off. Today we're not here to celebrate. We're here to be on. We're here to call on President Biden and the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, and to warn that our democracy stands on the brink of serious trouble without these bills. Last week, the president said he's tired of being quiet about voting rights. Well, we're tired of being patient. Since January 6, 2021, when the insurrectionists attacked our Capitol, 19 legislatures have passed 34 laws clawing back voting rights for their citizens. In states like my home state, where new laws, I should say of Georgia, are designed to confuse voters so they don't know where to go. They kick people off the voter rolls so they show up to vote and find out they're not registered. They close polling stations and limit voting hours so working parents and folks without access to transportation can't get there in time. These laws are being passed with knife-like precision to cut black and brown voters out of the process. And they're exactly what the Voting Rights Act once protected against. That's just one state, but it's all over. Texas, Florida, Iowa, Arizona, the list goes on. More legislatures are gearing up to pass laws like these when they convene this year. And our Senate is letting them get away with it because of a little technicality called the filibuster. With the filibuster, a single senator can prevent a bill from coming up for debate just by sending an email. They can stop a bill from being debated, let alone voted on. This is why people say the Senate is broken. But it gets worse. The filibuster was used to stop civil rights legislation for 100 years after the Civil War. Now think about that. The history books tell you that after the Civil War, people who had been enslaved for 250 years were finally free. But that's not the truth. They had to fight for 100 more years before they could overcome the filibuster, just to have their right to vote protected. And now the filibuster is being weaponized again. The irony is that all these laws taking away our rights are being passed by a simple majority, while here in Washington, the effort to reinstate them has to get a super majority to pass. The good news is that we have the power to address the injustices. We can eliminate the filibuster with a simple majority and then pass this bill that every Democratic senator says they support. But as you've heard, a few people stand in the way. Not just Republicans, every one of them is taking an immoral position against voting rights. But that's not who I want to talk about today. I'm talking about two Democratic senators, Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who say they support the bill but refuse to eliminate the filibuster to pass. They think the real problem isn't that our rights are being stolen. They think the real problem is a disease of division that can be cured with some optimism and conversation. Now, my father worked to bring people together in his time, but he was no Pollyanna. In his speech, The Other America, he talked about how some people were pushing back on civil rights because, like these two senators, they felt the problem couldn't be solved with legislation. They told him he had to change hearts first, and he worked hard at that. After all, he was a Baptist preacher. But he knew that when someone is denying you of your fundamental rights, conversation and optimism won't get you very far. He said, although it may be true that morality can't be legislated, behavior can be regulated. Even though it might be true, he said, that the law cannot change the heart, it can restrain the heartless. Even though it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, it can restrain him from lynching me. So let me be clear. When states are engaging in lawless voter suppression, only the law can stop them. Senators Sinema and Manchin also say if the bill doesn't get bipartisan support, it shouldn't pass. Well, the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenships to slaves in 1868, that didn't have bipartisan support. Should formerly enslaved people have been denied citizenship, Senator Sinema? The 15th Amendment that gave formerly enslaved people the right to vote in 1870, that didn't have bipartisan support. Should former slaves have been denied the right to vote, Senator Manchin? In 1922, 23, and 24, some senators filibustered an anti-lynching bill that had passed in the House. Would Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema have supported blocking those bills too? I'm just applying their logic here and showing that it's not logical at all. To them, the filibuster is sacred, except for when it's not. In 2010, Senator Sinema supported the idea of using reconciliation to get around the filibuster and pass health care reform. Just last month, they both supported an exception to the filibuster to raise the debt ceiling. But they draw the line at protecting the rights of millions of voters. History will not remember them kindly. In April 1963, my father was jailed in Birmingham for protesting segregation. While there, he wrote an open letter in which he said the biggest stumbling block was not the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods or direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. He was surrounded by people who told him to wait until a more convenient time and to use more agreeable methods. 59 years later, it's the same old song and dance from Senator Manchin and Sinema. But my father did not let up for a moment, and neither have we. More than 180 partners, over 1,000 faith leaders, and millions nationwide fought to make this vote possible. You're the reason President Biden spoke out last week and is swinging for the fences. You're the reason Speaker Pelosi has brought about powerful legislation and every procedural solution possible to protect black and brown Americans. You are the reason Leader Schumer set a deadline and is bringing the bill to a vote tomorrow. Organizing works, protesting works, and we cannot let up now. So no matter what happens tomorrow, we must keep the pressure on and say no more empty words. Don't tell us what you believe in. Show us with your votes. History will be watching what happens tomorrow. Black and brown Americans will be watching what happens tomorrow. In 50 years, students will read about what happens tomorrow and know whether our leaders had the integrity to do the right thing. Mr. President, Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, members of the Senate, pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act now. If you can deliver an infrastructure bill for bridges, you can deliver voting rights for Americans. If you do not, there is no bridge in this nation that can hold the weight of that failure. Thank you. And now I have the great honor of introducing the leaders who believed in this fight from the beginning and who have stood by the side of black and brown Americans on voting rights. Speaker Pelosi has used her position of leadership to push from every angle to get voting rights bills passed, and we would not be where we are today without her commitment to our democracy. Representative Joyce Beatty, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, has been instrumental in passing voting rights legislation in the House and getting us to this point in the fight. Representative Terry Sewell has been a pillar in the voting rights fight and leading the House to deliver for voting rights just like they delivered for bridges. Because of the leadership of these women, the House passed this crucial legislation to protect our democracy, and action now rests with the Senate. First, please join me in welcoming the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Martin. What an honor it is, personally and officially, to be here with the family of Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. and Coretta Scott King. To hear Yolanda speak about the future and what this all means to young people, how proud her grandparents are. And to hear Arndrea talk about what is at stake in all of this couldn't be more clear. And Martin, thank you for the challenge that you have put forth. It is my honor also to be here with some of the leadership of the House. The leader of the Congressional Black Caucus made it for us, working with Eric Holder and John Sarbanes and others, and Mr. Clyburn, to make sure this legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act, was passed. And Terry Sewell has been the author of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, even before it was called that. She's been for it for years and advocating relentlessly, and you will hear from them. Let me just say that to what the family had to say about the history and the prospects, let us just say amen. In Congress, we'd say I associate myself with the remarks. But I just want to add this, because I was always watching the King family from school and all the rest. In fact, I was at the march. I couldn't stay to hear the speech, can you imagine? Because I had to leave to go get married. That's why I can always remember how long ago this speech was, or how long ago I've been married. How long I've been married. But in any event, Dr. King, Coretta Scott King, and those who were associated with him included our beloved John Lewis. They believed in nonviolence. They traveled, the Kings, to India to study the Mahatma Gandhi principle of nonviolence. The word for nonviolence in Sanskrit, satyagraha, has two meanings. One is nonviolence, the other is insistence on the truth. And that's the message they shared with them, brought back, and the rest. And we are insisting on the truth. The truth is that what is happening in the Congress, and I give great credit to the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, for his relentless and persistence in trying to get this done, and to the president for his leadership. But we have to get this done. And the truth is that our colleagues, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, must weigh the equities here. While it may be true to them that the filibuster is an important custom, it is not the Constitution of the United States, the truth is. And the truth is that the Constitution says only if you're ratifying a treaty, convicting an impeached person, or ratifying the Constitution, a simple majority. That's why the vice president can break a tie, 50-50. So the truth, we want all of them in the Senate to weigh the equities. We all want bipartisanship. We all strive for it. We have a responsibility to do so. But when we cannot have it, we cannot confine our democracy to what might be bipartisanly possible. So I ask our colleagues in the Senate, respectfully, for what they think filibuster means, to compare that, to weigh the equities against our democracy, because nothing less is at stake than our democracy. This is about suppressing the vote. It's about nullifying the elections, which Dr. King talked about that day. Nullifying the election. It's about just doing so many things to be obstacles to participation. That's wrong. The truth is, that's wrong. And this family, and John Lewis, and so beautifully that this bill is named for him, but the first bill, he wrote the first 300 pages of what is now called Freedom to Vote. And as has been indicated by the King family, this bill is supported by all of the Democrats, House and Senate. It's just the filibuster in a way. So in a way, if you really, truly want to honor Dr. King, don't dishonor him by using a congressional custom as an excuse for protecting our democracy. We have no right to honor this family, to visit the monument. Imagine 36 years old, left this earth in such a way that he has a monument on the mall along with Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all of them with tears in their eyes for the departure from our democracy that is happening right now, unless the truth is acknowledged and this legislation is passed. And with that, I want to yield to our am I introducing? Mm-hmm. Our distinguished chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Working with her has been a joy because she has been so persistent. She brings her own record of civil rights experience to the Congress and to this subject, as does our distinguished whip, Mr. Clyburn. Without her leadership and her persistence, we would not have passed that first bill, the For the People Act, which is now called Freedom to Vote. It was an honor to serve with her as well as with Terry Sewell. We are just so determined to make this happen tomorrow, and no one more determined than the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty of Ohio.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your leadership. It is an honor for me to be here today and for me to be the chairwoman of the powerful Congressional Black Caucus. To the King family, thank you, Martin, Arndrea, Yolanda, for the peace walk that we just did, for keeping the dream alive and for deliver for voting rights. To you, I say thank you. But today we come to seize the opportunities for justice that lay before us now, because we cannot redeem the soul of America without the courage to fight the barriers of cultural, systemic, environmental racism. And at every turn, we must remind America that we have the right now. The right for education, the right for child care, housing, economic and social justice. But what? It is all born out of the right to vote. That is why I have dedicated my life to connecting people, public policy, and politics, fighting for justice and civil rights for all. That is why I marched with this family. That is why I say thank you for giving us, Yolanda, and your voice that represents our future. The late John Lewis, Martin Luther King III, Reverend Al Sharpton, Tamika Mallory, and so many more, Jesse Jackson. Thank you. But let me just say today that I marched with the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer as I crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. That is why I was arrested recently in the United States Senate for demanding the protection for our voting rights. I stand on Fannie Lou Hamer's shoulders. I stand on the shoulders of Shirley Chisholm, Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks, and Dorothy Height. And Yolanda, you and my two grandchildren, Leah and Spencer, the new generation, and you're doing it your way. But let me say to you, you stand on our foundation. Together, we must tear down the walls of injustice against voting rights and insist that the Senate pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, because silence is not an option. The Congressional Black Caucus has called for the vote, demanding the Senate to take immediate actions on voting rights legislation. We will not yield our efforts to enshrine voting rights legislation into law, nor will we allow a filibuster to filibuster away our democracy and our voting rights. Today, we are speaking to a pained and frustrated nation, but tomorrow and the days to come, we will witness the Senate do its job to call for the vote. But let me say this loudly and clearly. We must draw the line in the sand of justice for any member not standing with us on voting rights. They are obstructionists to the America's promise of freedom and justice, and we must stand against them. The nation must join us and make some noise. Your father and grandfather said, lightning makes no noise, no sound until it strikes. Well, America, today let's make some noise. To this nation, let's stand up and strike back, fight for our voting rights. Lastly, the Congressional Black Caucus, the conscience of the Congress. I promise you that we stand with you. We stand with your father's dream. We stand with your courageous leadership, Speaker Pelosi, because you did your job. And I want the nation to know the House passed the Voting Rights Act. And so now, America, that's our power. That's our message from the Congressional Black Caucus. And in case you didn't know, I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve this message. God bless you. And now it gives me great honor and distinction to introduce a person who needs no introduction. I call her the Mother of Alabama. She is one who has led us with the late John Lewis across that Edmund Pettus Bridge. She is an author of Voting Rights, and it is my privilege to call her a friend, a proud member of the Congressional Black Caucus, a leader, the Honorable Congresswoman Terry Sewell.
I'm Congresswoman Terry Sewell, and I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District. It includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, and yes, my hometown of Selma, Alabama. You see, voting rights is very personal to me. So many senators, so many legislators, and the King family join us year after year to walk across that bridge to commemorate what happened there on Bloody Sunday. And to say, no more. No more. We are once again at that precipice, an inflection point, if you will. While we no longer have to count how many marbles are in a jar or recite backwards the Declaration of Independence, today's modern-day voting suppression is no less pernicious. Long lines, purging of rolls. The list goes on and on. But today, as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, it can't be a celebration, as Yolanda said, because we need legislation. We need the Senate to do its job. Almost 6 decades ago, John Lewis and the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement marched, fought, and yes, bled on a bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. Their efforts culminated in the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And voting rights was never partisan until recently. The Voting Rights Bill passed 5 times for reauthorization under 4 Republican presidents. But now, we're having a problem called the filibuster. I agree with my colleagues. I agree with the King family. We cannot let a process stand in the way. A process, oh, by the way, that over 150 times have been set aside, and most recently by the raising of the debt ceiling. If we can raise the debt ceiling to protect the full faith and credit of the American government, surely we can pass the John Robert Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act to protect our democracy. I know people are tired and frustrated, and we can be tired and we can be frustrated, but what we can't do is give up. Just think what John Lewis, if he had given up, those marchers marching across that bridge, if they had been bludgeoned on that bridge and didn't try to go back for Turnaround Tuesday or ultimately to complete that march. They didn't give up. They didn't give out. Think of Rosa Parks on a bus. Had she not given up, what our lives would have been. It was because of her courage, because of her sacrifice, that we now have integration in interstate transportation and commerce. So I say, let us remember the words of Coretta Scott King. She was profound and prophetic when she said, "Struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You have to earn it and win it in each generation." So this is our mountain moment. Will we give up, give out, or will we keep pressing forward? We must keep pressing forward. I want to say in closing that it's never lost on me that I get to represent my home district, my hometown of Selma, Alabama. My job each and every day is not only to represent the people, the wonderful people of Alabama's 7th Congressional District today, but it's also to protect and further the legacy of Selma, of Montgomery, of Birmingham. And I will not give up, and I will not give out. It was King, Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, if you cannot run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But we must keep moving forward. Let's move forward together and demand that the Senate pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Robert Lewis Advancement Act. Let's do it, and let's do it now. Thank you.
Today, we'd just like to thank Speaker Pelosi, Congresswoman Beatty from my hometown of Ohio, Congresswoman Sewell, and the entire King family for your leadership. There is no celebration without legislation. Thank you. We'll continue our program.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. That's okay. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Now we have this morning, the King family, DC organizers, voting rights advocates cross the Frederick Douglass Bridge, a new landmark of access that our next speaker was instrumental in bringing to life. She also played a critical role in fighting for voting rights and DC statehood. I'd like to welcome my mayor, the DC mayor, Mayor Mira.